Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us, even with a bit of a late start and some technical difficulties, but we're really happy to welcome you here today. My name is Anna Robotstetter. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Advara, and I'm going to facilitate this wonderful webinar we have, Reducing Site Burden Throughout Study Startup. Before we begin, just want to cover a few quick housekeeping items. You can access the presentation slides via the resources window. And if you have questions during the webinar, please submit them using the Q&A window on your screen or email them to webinar@advarra.com. We will address as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation, and we'll also be working with our speakers to respond to questions that we may not have time to address live today. This webinar is eligible for continuing education credits. Qualified CE credits will be listed on your certification of attendance. To obtain credits for a different certification, check with your professional organization to determine if this webinar meets its continuing education requirements. To receive a certificate of attendance, you will need to view the webinar in its entirety, then complete a short survey. The survey helps make sure we're bringing you relevant content in future webinars and other educational offerings. At the end of the presentation, do not close your window. After the presentation ends, you'll see the survey appear. And once you've submitted your survey responses, the attendance certificate will be emailed to you within 1 business day. If you'd like, you can also bring the survey up during the presentation by clicking the survey button on the On24 toolbar at the bottom of your screen. All right, now for the good stuff. I'd like to introduce our host for today. James Werdeman is our Senior Vice President of Product Strategy and Innovation at Advarra. In this role, he collaborates with Advarra's research community to understand their challenges and translates those challenges into solution-based enhancements to our product offerings. His 17 years experience leading customer support and product management functions ensures that Advarra can advance and optimize the day-to-day workflows of clinical research. James, I'll let you take it from here.
Great. Thanks, Anna. Thanks to our panelists joined us today. For those that don't know, I just want to give a brief introduction to Advarra and why we're really invested in discussing this topic today. So Advarra provides integrated solutions to the entire clinical research market. And we really focus on kind of 4 key tenets as we think about those solutions we bring to market. Number 1, safeguarding trial participants. 2, really important to empower clinical sites, all while making sure we're ensuring research compliance and optimizing research performance. And with these solutions, Advarra is a trusted partner of over 3,500 sponsors, CROs, academic medical centers, research institutions, research sites. So really kind of proud of the work that we do in this industry. Our solutions span a variety of different areas, but they include trusted independent oversight services for those committees. We build a lot of great innovative software solutions for, again, the whole industry, so sites, sponsors, CROs. And we have a lot of experienced consultants with deep-seated connections across our industry. Again, Advarra really provides expertise and technology that we believe is needed to advance clinical research and to help our clients. So when you think about our footprint, so I'm proud to say our technology solutions for site sponsors through CROs are used by tens of thousands of users on a regular basis, research personnel across the globe. And so because of our deep expertise serving all sides of the clinical research market, we are really well suited to help advance specifically and help collaborate, build those collaborative workflows with these critical stakeholders. One way we do this is we foster community, foster collaboration across the whole industry. So last year we launched what we call our Site Sponsor Consortium. And the consortium meets on a regular basis to identify key challenges in those cross-industry workflows. So things that cross generally your sites, your sponsors, your CROs. So we have representatives from all different types of the industry, different variety of sites, variety of sponsors, CROs, and other key industry players come help us as well through our consortium. Companies like CDISC, PwC, who we have on the call today. Most recently, our consortium met at Advarra's 2023 Ensemble Conference in March. We spent a whole day with this group talking about study startup. And today we hope to kind of share some of those insights with our audience. So excited with representatives from our consortium here on the call. So Fortrea, formerly LabCorp, Syneos Health, Velocity Clinical Research, and also, as mentioned, other trusted industry experience from PwC. So let me jump in here and introduce our panelists. So first up, Laura Edgerton is the Associate Director of the North America Study Startup at Syneos Health. More than 15 years of industry experience. Laura works closely with our IRB and our site-sponsored consortium teams at Advarra, where she discusses optimizing advanced technology opportunities to enhance study startup. Dana Glisson serves as the Global Head of Site Readiness and Regulatory with Fortrea, again formerly known as LabCorp. Dana has been in the healthcare field for 29 years, first starting as a research nurse before moving into the CRO space. Aaron Williams, Vice President of Study Startup at Velocity Clinical Research. Aaron has a history in study startup, serving as the Global Head of Site Contracts at ParXL. And prior to that, Aaron was the Global Head of Site Contracts at PPD. And lastly, we're excited to welcome Ian Schaefer, a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers Pharmaceutical Advisory Practice. A biologist by education, Ian has worked in the biopharma industry, focused specifically in clinical development for the last 20 years. Ian joined PwC in 2019, and he is currently focusing on global clinical development business transformation enabled by digital technologies. So with everyone, really thanks for our panelists for joining us here today. And what we hope to talk about today, that perennial problem, study startup. Talk about the challenges that we all talked about during the site-sponsored consortium, and success stories and solutions from Syneos Health and Fortrea, and any trending insights from our Ian from PwC. Before we get started, a quick poll for our audience. We would like to know, what type of organization are you representing today? So our options on our poll, which should be popping up on your screen here, hopefully, you're going to have either from a research site of any type, sponsor, CRO, or other. Just give you a few seconds to fill that out. We'll have a couple more polls throughout to keep it interactive. This way we can just collect some good information from our audience. So our problem, as we define it, study startup. So just to kind of give some definition here, as we think about study startup, broke it down into these 8 categories: identifying sites, doing the feasibility process on the site, qualifying sites, the budgeting process, the contracting process, that initial onboarding with all of the document exchange, making sure everybody has the latest version of everything, site initiation, training, and reporting. So think about these kind of 8 key areas and how they impact an organization. And we're going to move to our next poll right away. Moving quick, make sure we have enough time for everything. The next poll, so think about these 8 categories. Which of them are your organization's biggest challenge when it comes to study startup? So if you're a site, is it going to be that budgeting process? And whether it's something where it's a challenge between a site and a sponsor, for example, during the budgeting process, or it might be an internal budgeting process because it's having to go work with your health system to get the latest charge master, for example. So think about that. Give you this one a little bit longer since we have a few choices there. What is that biggest challenge that you face during study startup? Give you a couple seconds. And there's the other choice down at the bottom, if none of these fit the bill. All right, moving in. Oops, did I click too many? Oh, sorry. Moving ahead here. So first up, I'd like to introduce Erin Williams. As I mentioned before, she is from Velocity Clinical Research. So Erin, from a site perspective, as we talked about during the site sponsor consortium and kind of your role, if you want to give some commentary for us on the biggest challenges that you think we face here in the study startup world.
Sure. Thank you for that. So I would say the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges that we're facing is the repetition and requests for information over and over again, whether that's in budgeting, contracting, or feasibility. We are asked for the same information from sponsors and CROs time and time again. Typically, the information doesn't change all that much. I mean, certainly budgets do vary from study to study. But for the most part, we are providing this information on a consistent basis, multiple times a week, and in our case, for multiple sites. So this is a huge burden on us. It does take up a lot of our time, and sometimes the questions are phrased a little bit differently, but in the end, specifically for feasibility, the questions are typically always the same, and our answers generally don't change all that much. We're not moving. We do have pretty much the same equipment, so that is a huge hindrance for us. Certainly the budgeting items, specifically the site fees, they typically don't change for us except maybe on an annual basis, but we're consistently asked for them time and time again. And as well as the contract, again, the same. We really don't negotiate that many terms in our agreements, quite frankly. But we're asked to complete the same contract time and time again, and provide that same information time and time again. And I would say the next biggest challenge that we're seeing is this site initiation and training. For us, it's highly inconsistent, even from CRA to CRA on the same study with the same CRO or sponsor. They're asking us for different items. Maybe one accepts a training certification, maybe one doesn't. But again, we're providing that same information time and time again. And then also the site initiation as a whole, just getting to that green light. What have we missed? We feel like we've done that training, that systems access request with the PI, with the study staff multiple times over, and we're still having to do it, and it's still somehow we don't have the correct access. So I would say these are probably our biggest challenges as a site and what we're facing going forward, and what prevents us from getting to green light, and more importantly, what prevents us from getting patients in studies.
Great, thanks, Erin, for your perspective. And I guess one question for you. Velocity is a bit unique in that you also have a global footprint of sites. And I think as you kind of think towards the future, that's probably going to become more and more common. So whether it's health systems or academic medical centers or site networks that are growing their footprint, there's probably a lot of growth in global sites as well. Do you have any thoughts on the extra challenge it is when you have global sites?
For us, the biggest extra challenge is certainly the different regulatory bodies that we have to submit to on a global basis. Certainly in the U.S., it's quite easy. We can generally do the submission for our sites, all look the same in the U.S. But when we move to the EU and the UK, and really anywhere beyond, for those of you who work in Asia or South America, all of those regulatory bodies look quite different. So those document exchanges are very different, and the expectation from those bodies around what's going to be submitted is very different. So I would say those regulatory expectations are different. And then again, when working with a sponsor or CRO, how responsive is that person in helping us, ex-US get those submissions done? Because that plays a key role in how fast we can actually turn around study startup. Thanks, James.
Great, thanks, Erin. All right, and we'll hear from you a little bit in a few slides as well. But I want to jump here to Dana from Fortrea. Dana, just want to give us a little bit of an intro about your role and talk about from a CRO perspective.
Yeah, so certainly appreciate being here. And I have come from the site side of things many, many years ago. Then in the CRO side, on the clinical side, and now just started in the startup side just in January. So grateful to be here. And grateful to hear from Erin as well on kind of those challenges, because I think we can all agree that we're seeing them on our side and we recognize them, right? So what I wanted to talk a little bit about today is really how technology, or in some cases, the lack thereof good end-to-end technology, really has a part to play in that site burden. So the concept being really for future state, how do we ensure that we have less but better technology in the future for our sites? So as Erin has even mentioned, that the challenges that we know from a CRO standpoint is that the feasibility process is complex. We're asking the 17-page questionnaire over and over again, repetitive questions that we ask every time. We also know, and from my opinion, it's a very one-sided approach, right? So we're asking information, but what we need to be doing along the way is gathering information of our sites as well. The other thing I want to touch on is the multiple vendor impact and how that impacts the site workload, not just in study startup. I think it starts there, right, with the training components, but it also lingers on throughout the project in and of itself. And while COVID really helped us boom into technology, what it also has done is really, been where we've looked at project and said, let's apply every piece of technology we can to a project, and that may not be the best approach. And we're seeing that right now because that has a burden both on the site side of things and when we apply site technology as well as patient technology, the burden on the site is all of that technology, right? And then obviously the multiple sign-on challenges and the integration with the site platform. Sites have technology as well that we need to start thinking about how we work with our site partners to make sure that we're integrating what they already have. So let's talk a little bit about that solutioning phase and really kind of digging in a little bit. So we're starting really to dig in on the pre-planning and making sure that we're being site-centric in our patient solutions as it relates to our technology especially. So just to give an example, we may apply as a CRO, a light touch, what we consider from a monitoring standpoint. But in fact, we've added this technology for e-consent, this technology for e-diaries, this technology for some patient portals. And what it's done is it's actually put the ownership back onto the site and increase that site burden. And in reality, at the end of the day, depending on the type of site, the type of study, the amount of recruitment that we're going to have, it actually in turn has had a negative impact where we're actually having to go to site more and more because it's more training and more onboarding. So really talking about that solution up front and that pre-planning phase on that vendor impact. The vendor impact at the project level, the patient level, talking with our site partners as early as pre-award now, not waiting till we hit award, but pre-award to say, not just from a protocol design, is this make sense, but the technology that we want to use, is this reasonable technology for everyone? And then as we deploy those studies, we're going to start doing that 360 loop and problem solving, what worked, what didn't work. And I do want to touch on, again, the technology-based and in that site selection. As Erin had mentioned, we're asking repetitive questions. So we're really driving to leverage our partners to say, okay, we need what I would consider a site investigator type database to ensure that we're only asking the 4 or 5 questions that are relevant for the project, because we have worked with sites over and over and over again. And in that space, we really want to dig into what access to technology do the sites have? What capabilities do they have? What's the equipment that they have? And then really tie that all together. So we're really being strategic when we're going out and asking the questions that we really need around that protocol. And then especially leveraging our sites and knowledge when we're actually looking at vendors. So we know, as I had mentioned, there's a lot of great technology out there, but some of those technologies are not really end to end, right? So they fill a specific need, but not really a holistic need. So we're really doing a lot of work in this space to make sure that what we're going to be using in the future is more holistic and more, site-centric in the future. Okay. So I'm going to move on. I do want to touch a little bit on that aspect of site contracts and budgets. So what we have also seen is the complexity of our projects becoming more and more challenging, right? And the more and more procedures we're doing, the more and more it takes from a budgeting and a contracting standpoint. As we think about the global environment that we have, more procedures. We have countries sometimes where we're having to execute 8 to 10 contracts to get one site up and running in a country. So the more and more we put into our protocols, the more and more complex this budgeting and contracting seems to get. I feel that this space is very transactional and not fit for purpose for our sites. And that maybe the CRO workforce profile that are working on these activities needs to be a bit more site-centric. And we're not always, to Erin's point, leveraging past knowledge to streamline, and we need to do more of that in that space. So the solutions that are coming, right, is really a protocol design, and we're really talking strategically now, upfront, pre-planning with our sponsors around what are the absolutes in your protocol that you need to actually meet your endpoints, and what are the nice to haves. So are the nice to have something we can get from, other research studies, real world data, and really just focus our design and our protocols on what we actually need to hit our endpoints. So those are the types of conversations that we're starting to have now. And then balancing the CRO workforce we need a little bit of that legal component in there, but also we need that site expertise. So we're starting to funnel in some site expertise in this space so that when we're working with our sponsors, we're actually supporting what the sites need, and we're enabling that conversation to happen versus just being that mediator, what I would say, back and forth with the sponsor, and not really educating the sponsor sometimes on what the sites actually need and why. And then the big part of this is around taking our experience, layering into the contracts that we already have. So we have seen when we actually in the upfront stage plan differently. So when we actually take previous contracts of sites and we layer in the terminology that they usually use, get pre-approval from the sponsor, even though we may spend an extra week up front doing that, it actually cuts down on that time and actually is a better site experience. And we need to be doing that more, working with our sponsors a lot more in this space. And then absolutely with the MSAs, we talk a lot about MSAs and we need to do more and more of that, but we do obviously need to get sponsor alignment to those early on in the pre-award space so we can speed up that process and really kind of create a better experience for our sites. So those are just a few things and solutions that we're looking at really to help improve in this space.
Great, thanks, Dana. So one follow-up for you. So there was a lot of what you're talking about is trying to involve the site earlier in the process, which is great, right? Something we talked about actually at the Site Sponsor Consortium is an overwhelming response from the site saying, absolutely, they're very willing to spend that time up front, even if ultimately they might not even sign up for that particular trial, but they would be willing to participate in that process of, we heard some of them are like, the schedule events would be impossible to do at our site, like physically impossible to move a patient through the workflow because of that. And when that stuff gets caught so late, creates a lot of amendments, creates a lot of hassle. So yeah, that sounds definitely the right direction to go in.
It's where we need to head. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to jump ahead here. Next up, Laura from Syneos.
Thanks, James. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here. I think I have quite a bit to touch on. I feel like based off just Erin and Dana's parts and their feedback and thoughts and behind crucial improvement, one of the things that we've really put some emphasis onto is initiation and hearing Erin's feedback from a site perspective of, feeling delayed out of burden of having repeat questions asked and having to answer and provide the same information is something that we're really taking to heart, I think, from a CRO perspective, to really ensure that we're doing everything up front. And this is kind of what Dana was saying, is do everything up front to support our sites to move through activation as fast as possible, whether that's through the data and technology side or helping and support in any way we can with least burden of questions and document collection as possible. One thing that we have found, I feel like as really, I'd like to state as a success for us at Syneos, something that we're looking to do, and I think probably across the board from the CRO space, is really focus on the initiation steps and everything that's required for initiation. So we're having launch calls at the beginning. So it's really bringing in the site involvement from the very beginning, and introducing them more so to the protocol, the study design, the things that will be necessary for activation. So the protocol specific trainings, system accesses that they're going to need in order to be successful in moving forward with enrollment and data collection, and really taking a hard look at timelines and what we can all agree to, so that when we are moving through startup, as we are starting to approach closer to SIV and activation, we are already set up for success for that quick activation, and we don't see any delays or hindrances towards making that activation happen. And so having launch calls, talking through everything, talking about if you already have access to systems that you've worked on from previous studies, we're able to dive into that, make sure you have the access that is needed. Or if there's specific trainings that you've already taken, we can look into that data as well to ensure you're not having to repeat history and spend a lot of time doing anything that is a burden or taking time away from what we need you to focus on to get your site up and running. So I do think that is a great new approach to be taken into activation to help align the sites into activation space. I'm going to flip to the next slide. And so this is in regards to just document exchange. I feel like I've talked about this at Consortium as well. And it's something that I feel like everyone focuses on highly because, again, to Aaron's point, this is something that become repetitive, especially non-protocol specific documents, of having to constantly provide these sets of documents to every different CRO counterpart you're working with to get towards activation, is having to reapply these same documents and making sure that they're up to date. Most things don't change though within a year or two. So that can become redundant and burdensome for sure. So I know there's been a lot of conversation. This kind of goes to Dana's point towards the technology driven side, and really, working to establish what technologies can we all use across the industry to set us up for repository spaces where we can house documents that are non-protocol specific, that sites can access quickly and easily for, updating for new staff, or if there's any new changes, and CRO sponsors can also access quickly and for quick turnaround times. I know that the more we look into that space and open that field up for everyone's access, I feel like we'll see such a big, tremendous change, and having the burden of constantly having to redo essential documents that are non-protocol specific. It's difficult to get away from the protocol specific documents since those are so obviously specific towards, protocol signature page that goes along with one protocol. But we do see that, if we can try to maintain that collection of the non-protocol specific to take that burden away and just be able to pull it from the CRO side, so that we don't even have to burden the site with collecting it. I think we'll definitely see increases in changes to turnaround times and less stress on the sites from that perspective.
Great, thanks, Laura. Yeah, this is an interesting topic, definitely one we spent a lot of time on during the site sponsor consortium as well, recognizing it feels like the sponsor CRO industry is recognizing how much technology sites actually have and use, where a lot of this can be done in a much more automated fashion through integration. So it's great to see some movement in that space and acceptance of those types of items. So great, thank you for that.
Sure, thanks.
Jump ahead here to Ian to provide an interesting perspective, kind of looking industry-wide perspective for us. Jump on in.
Yeah, it's great to be with everybody here today. Ian Schaefer, I'm a partner with PwC's R&D practice. I'm a lifer in clinical development. I've spent north of 23 years spanning working at a sponsor, working at technology providers, and for the past 15 years, providing consulting services to everything from small startup biotechs all the way to the top 5 biotechs in terms of, or biopharmas, I should say, in terms of capabilities across the clinical development process. So I'll take a little bit of a broader perspective in terms of what I'm seeing. I'll try and cover off, all of these different topics, but I really kind of focus on more on the planning and delivery side, thinking about things like the site relationship models, site collaboration, talking a little bit about from the contracting side, because I heard that come up multiple times across many of my peers, and I agree this is continues to be an area and a pain point around how we're looking at more like the data-driven budgets and how that's starting to look. And then maybe touching last on some cross-team awareness and how multiple organizations are really looking at, not only building the awareness, but being ready from a resourcing side. So I'd probably start with, on the planning and delivery side, one thing that's really kind of fascinating that's starting to really take hold in the industry, it's almost upfront to some of these capabilities that we're looking at today. It's really around protocol optimization at the end of the day. We're at the point where, most historically, the MDs, the medics, they take the protocols, they write them. We're seeing, I would say, advances around protocol review committees. And that has largely done more from an insular perspective within a single sponsor or partnering with a CRO, obviously managing regulatory feedback. What we're starting to see now is more of an active benchmarking process. So we talked about patient burden as a good example. How many blood draws, for this particular indication, for this particular therapeutic area, are we actually doing? Are we out of the norm? Are we within the norm? And how does that line back to the scientific need of the trial and its objectives? So we're really taking this data-driven approach now and actually looking at both a combination of historical and publicly available data sets to see whether or not the design itself is within the norms. And it's not meant to challenge the medics at the end of the day saying that they're designed wrong. It's meant to have that data-driven discussion that says, why are we collecting 20 blood draws when, the average in this particular indication draws 5? What is the value of that additional 15, and how do we weigh that against the patient burden as well as the site burden and the cost and the budget associated with it? And so we're really starting to see some really interesting capabilities come together around intelligent clinical trial design and really kind of optimizing the key kind of inputs that then drive these types of capabilities. And so when you think about, the identification and qualification of sites as an example, I personally feel like we're always, for every single trial we're starting with a deficit of investigators. We have usually the high performers, the ones that, or the KOLs or the sites that we always go to. We're now seeing, I would say, a much more data-driven approach in terms of evaluating not only the performance, but using the wealth of that historical data to start building some advanced analytics. I know everybody's probably tired of the AI hype cycle, but we're actually having a great deal of success using machine learning to start to predict what are going to be the high-performing regions, what are going to be the high-performing sites, and then starting to use all of that operational data to best understand the sequencing by country, by region, what is the most optimal path that reduces cycle time. Most sponsors, that is the only currency that matters at this point in time. Way back when it was, productivity, then it was efficiency, then it was cost. Now the primary focus across the industry seems to be around cycle time. And so really, what can they do to eliminate waste, decrease the number of dependencies, and optimize the sequencing? And so we're starting to see a lot more emphasis on not taking kind of the one-size-fits-all by the different regions approach, but how do we optimize within particular regions, taking into maybe the regulatory implications that we talked about, the cultural implications, and how do we optimize those sequences so that we actually get the actual clinical trial initiated in the most effective way? Because most sponsors, I think, historically would say that they focus on first site in as their major metric. We're now seeing that shift significantly to last patient in. So that is, I think, a key driver, again, to the end-to-end cycle time that we're looking at. From the site relationship model, and I think we heard a couple really good examples of kind of the challenges that are out there. I think a lot of sponsors now are really looking at segmentation of their sites. Not all sites are the same. We've got the large the AMCs on this call to probably some of the smallest single investigator shops that are out there. And all of those different sites have different needs. They have different ways of working. And they have different expectations. And so we're seeing a lot of focus on, like we talked about, putting the MSAs in place for the larger academic medical centers. So everything's pre-negotiated, becomes a simple statement of work. Terms and conditions are done. The budgeting's largely done, or the major procedures are pre-negotiated, trying to streamline that. But that's not enough, right? At the end of the day, a lot of the investigators' preference around what clinical trials they participate comes down to the science at the end of the day. How can this benefit my patient population? Is it going to give my patients the greatest chance of success in terms of getting a unmet need fulfilled? And so we're starting to see, I would say, at least on the larger academic medical centers, these more strategic relationships that are starting to be put in place, where some sponsors even have like dedicated offices, and they walk through their entire portfolio and pipeline on a quarterly basis, and they're actively seeking input from some of these larger sites. And again, I think the real focus, as it should be, is also obviously focusing on the participant itself. And so we're really starting to see some, I would say, some enhanced capabilities around predicting patient burden. And obviously there's a lot of different technology, a lot of different models that are out there. But again, this is all largely driven from the protocol and goes back to the optimization component as well. And so I think the combination of focus on the site relationship model, right-sizing it for the type of site based upon historical performance and the predictive performance gets us to a natural prioritization. We're starting to see that more and more in terms of the tranching, in terms of sites and how they want to go with the initiation, because obviously the faster movers will drive the enrollment quicker. And again, thinking about it from a region by region perspective as well. Typically, historically the focus has been on US, then Europe, and then the rest of the world. We're starting to see a little bit more of a diversion from that and more of a broader kind of focus in terms of how to get the global study started more effectively. From a site collaboration perspective, I couldn't agree more with the colleagues on the call. With COVID, can't help but not mention that decentralization, all the technologies. We just recently completed a survey with, I think, 200 plus sites where I think the low end was 8 different systems, a combination of internal as well as sponsor, upwards to I think the highest was like before 38 with an average around 20 plus systems that a site coordinator was actively using on a day-by-day basis across the portfolio trials they're supporting. So while technology definitely offers benefits, the implications, and I saw the question in the chat around, the IT review as well, I couldn't agree more with that. We really need to think about the simplification of the site-facing technology, or at least something that really orchestrates it so it creates this kind of common presentation layer that creates a common user experience so sites aren't having to kind of struggle through and get a new username and password. I mean, my favorite thing when I used to be a CRA was to flip up the keyboard and look at all the passwords that were actually listed there. We need to get away from things that drive that type of behavior from a compliance perspective. We're also seeing, I would say, from a collaboration perspective, a greater emphasis on information sharing and a greater emphasis on how those can be done from a digital perspective and getting away from things like email, and Excel, which tends to be the fan favorite of most organizations. How do we actually streamline the notifications? How do we focus on, really getting the information in the hands of the sites at the time they need it? So that it doesn't delay or impact their work and they're able to continue on with the visit or the procedure, or actually managing the patient's journey, or most importantly, the patient safety side of things. Maybe going backwards a little bit from the contracting perspective, because when I was at a sponsor, 20 plus years ago, this was one of my primary areas of responsibility. It really hasn't changed much, right, at the end of the day. We still look at fair market value, we still negotiate the budgets, we look at the historical spend usually at the particular site or what was previously negotiated. In some cases, as we were talking about before, start all over again, which is obviously frustrating for the site. But now we're starting to see more, I would say, those interactive capabilities where sites can now actually see the budgets, or we're talking about, in some cases, as I mentioned before, pre-negotiation of the MSA and the standard procedures and the costs associated with that. So we're seeing a lot of emphasis on the site side, really thinking about cost benefit and where they go in from a fair market value perspective, and whether or not it's worth rationalizing going in, at a lower and negotiating up. We're seeing more kind of trend towards the higher end of the fair market value because they want to decrease the cycle time and the back and forth of the negotiation itself. I would also say from an automation perspective, this is an area that the sponsors are really focused on, right? So at the end of the day, the protocol, if you think about every artifact that we're talking about that sits in each one of these buckets, they're largely derivatives of what's in the protocol. And so now we're seeing sponsors actually try to drive automation from creating all these documents, so the quality's there, the cycle time's reduced, and we're getting the information in the hands of the CROs, the sites that need them very quickly. As well as reducing that end-to-end cycle time, because it can be from protocol approval to first site initiate anywhere from a couple months to a year plus, really focusing on contracting that. And then I would say last is really on the resourcing side. There's a really big emphasis on the sponsor side, as well as I'm seeing at least on the larger site side, is really understanding what does it take to actually participate in this clinical trial. Obviously looking at the series of activities, the scheduled assessments, the procedures, from the site side, and trying to understand what the site effort is, and then obviously trying to optimize around that. And then I would also say on the sponsor side, they're really focused again on, do they actually have the right resources, or does the CRO have the right resources and the right resourcing level? Because again, it's so much easier to get ahead of the curve than it is behind the curve and then trying to catch up. So I know that was pretty quick and pretty broad, but I hope that was informative in terms of kind of the broader industry trends that we're seeing across study startup.
Great, Ian, thanks. Yeah, it is really interesting to hear, like you said, very broad. So lots of things going on there around this space. So maybe two quick questions for you. What do the use of data in trying to find the right sites works great when lots of data exists. So do you have any advice for a smaller site that they might not have a lot of experience, but they're looking to grow their study portfolio? How do they get on the radar of these sponsors and CROs if they don't have a lot of data to show?
Yeah, obviously expressing interest, right, at the end of the day. Working with either through CROs, which is a great avenue in, and trying to get on the CRO's radar, but obviously finding the areas that usually you can find very easily, kind of either ways into the clinical development team, or even there's either patient portals or site portals where you can actually hand raise in terms of interest around participating in clinical trials. I would say there's multiple avenues at this point in which a site can kind of express interest and actually go after working at any of those types of trials that are out there. Obviously, I scan ct.gov on probably a weekly basis to see what interesting and new things have popped up. Another great source in terms of what's going on in the industry.
Great. And then on the flip side, there are larger, sophisticated sites that have lots of data that they want to do their own internal feasibility, right? They want to look at their own patient populations, their own staffing levels. Does the budget make sense for them? And that generally takes time, right, to do their own analysis. And I'm just kind of actually pulling something from the Q&A here earlier where somebody was commenting on this, where it's tough to get those questionnaires and turn them around in 5 days. Because they do want to answer them in a really thoughtful approach and most accurate. Otherwise, generally the PIs are just going to make something up. Any thoughts on that? Where this is almost a case where something almost has to be slowed down a little bit to make sure the site can give a thoughtful response on that questionnaire.
Yeah, I think probably I would imagine a lot of it is copy and paste from various questionnaires to the other. I think where you're going is really the patient population aspect of it. And what I would argue is most important is not the patient population that exists in the EMR, assuming there's an EMR. It's more the arrival rates, right? The diagnosis rates of that particular indication or disease, because that really kind of shows the frequency in which new patients are coming in and would be a potential candidate for that. And so there's various analytics that exist out there that actually help you troll through. Actually, another good use case, believe it or not, for machine learning, because that's arguably what machine learning is better at, is trolling through inordinate amount of data, identifying those patterns. And there's quite a few companies out there that are looking at applying that type of technology to actually go through and scan EMR data to identify those hidden potential patients.
Good, thanks. And those same questions also, we'll come back to at the Q&A, so for the other panelists as well, if there's any other feedback you want to give. And I want to just jump ahead here, just watching the clock, and kind of give a chance for Aaron, our site representative that we have here today. So any interesting thoughts or insights or comments from you on the end here?
Sure. So, I heard a lot of similarities in what Dana and Laura provided. I'm hearing a lot of improved collaboration, which we're definitely seeing, whether we're focused on improved communication, improved document change, or, a decrease in providing repeat information. It is something that we have seen get better, but certainly I think we have a way to go here. But any of these things would be helpful, and certainly I know our site, like many others, is willing to provide this to help decrease our overburden. And Ian brought up a really great point around the additional data endpoints. And again, are they really needed? It does put a huge burden on us, and really it puts a huge burden on the patient, to the point sometimes if there are too many, the patient may not even want to return to the study because maybe the end data collection points are too much, or they're too routine, and oftentimes they're not needed. I think listening to some of the PIs that do these studies quite often and really getting their input would be helpful, because they really can help drive what is going to get those patients in the door and what will make the trial more successful for all concerned. And then just thinking about some other things that really haven't been mentioned or maybe touched on. I know Ian referenced resourcing. I would say one thing that really kind of puts us in a bind are the CRA changes. And I know this can't be helped. People do different things in their career, but there really should be some level of standard on, if you've been monitored for a year by one person, having another monitor come in and change everything because they didn't like the way something looked, or, it was good enough for 2 years. What's happened here? This actually is a huge burden on all sites, and specifically to change whatever that person's looking for, that's just a nice to have and potentially not even needed. And I do see that quite a bit. And just overall CRA changes and really the impact this has on the site, and then becoming familiar with the site if they've never monitored before, which we do see a lot now. And again, that's just kind of the nature of the industry right now. But that is a huge burden on sites. And one other point I did not hear mentioned, certainly we talked about the budgets, but the stipends. And if we can't get the stipends right on budgets, it does impact recruitment and enrollment. And potentially, maybe it doesn't for all sites, but this is a huge issue for us. Patients are paying more to get transported back and forth from sites, whether they're taking Uber, public transportation, maybe they don't even have access to that. The cost of Uber has gone up significantly because the cost of gas has gone up. So providing a stipend that was fair market value a year ago and was acceptable a year ago, really isn't working anymore. And I think if we can't get the stipends right, it does impact overall participation. And you really have to think about the burden on the patient. Sitting in an all-day spirometry, they should be compensated for the time that they're there, because it does take out time in their life. And these are important studies that we need to recognize take time, and we want those good data endpoints and clean data. We need those patients in. So those would be my other things that weren't mentioned.
Great, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, and really good point about that, the rapidly changing economy, right? Prices are changing so swiftly on things that, fair market value a year ago probably isn't even close to what things are now. So I think it's a really important point. I'm going to jump ahead here to our last poll question for our audience, right? So we've heard lots of things, talked about lots of things, some exciting things going on, some good movement in particular directions. So based on what you heard, Which area can we make the most meaningful change? Where should we focus the attention of the industry where things can actually be improved in a short time frame? So I'm going to click ahead here to our poll question and give people a few thoughts, a few seconds on this. And don't forget the Q&A box. We're going to move into that session here. So if you have any questions for the panelists, absolutely use the Q&A box to submit that. All right. So as we move towards the Q&A session here, a couple final slides. So what, as Advarra, what can you expect from us? Our foundation is the sites. Empowering clinical sites is extremely important to us here at Advarra. That's what we have been doing. That's what we're going to continue to do. And with that, continue to advocate for those site-sponsored relationships, focus on the improvements, see where things can actually improve here in the industry, and solve those broad workflows, bringing as most impact as we can to this industry. So I'm going to hand it over back to Anna, the last couple wrap-up slides, and we'll get into the Q&A.
All right, thanks, James, and thanks to all of our presenters. What a thoughtful discussion. We had some great questions. Roland, midway through the discussion, a couple of here's on some of the statements that were made. So I think we've definitely hit the right nerve as a group. One thing I just want to say, while you're continuing to submit questions, there's an opportunity to learn a little bit more about how Advarra can support your site sponsor workflows within Study Startup. A lot of the consortium discussion and what James's role is translating some of these challenges and solutions and thoughtful points into actually bringing it to life via technology. And we're hosting an open demonstration of Advarra's Longboat platform for sponsors and CROs with a specific focus on streamlining study startup activities a little bit later this month. There is a link that you can register at on 24 and on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. All right, hopefully that gave you all some time to submit some questions. We only have about 5 minutes here, but just acknowledging that we will be answering questions with our presenters after the webinar has concluded, transcribing them and providing them as a follow-up. So if you have a question, feel free to submit it, even if we cannot get to it live today. All right. And I think first things first, or one kind of element that came up in the Q&A as a discussion point is the role of Medicare coverage analysis within Study Startup, and perhaps a lack of awareness of this critical workflow at sites within the sponsor and CRO environment. Maybe James or others, maybe Aaron, what is your awareness of Medicare coverage analysis? How are you maybe incorporating that awareness of that workflow into your timelines for Study Startup? Let's kick it off there.
This is Erin. I think, this is something that if you're working with a negotiator, specifically when you're working on the budget, you definitely have to get covered for this Medicare cost coverage analysis, which if they're not familiar with it, can be very time consuming and, again, prevent delays in getting startup as a whole. So that's just the budget piece. But I think there was an interesting comment in this comment around, the balance of the budget and making sure that what's paid out, what Medicare and Medicaid pay, and then what the sponsor pays, and really balancing out the budget. And I really don't know that there's any particular good way to do that. Aside from what I've seen happen in like Europe, where they do have, they have governmental healthcare systems. If it's a clinical trial, then and the patient's on a clinical trial, then there is no standard of care cost. Clinical trial must pay for all procedures. So in terms of budgeting and reconciling a budget, that would make that piece easier. But I'm not sure if it's something that your site could do. And certainly I'd be happy to have an offline discussion with you or follow up after if you'd like to flesh this idea out some more. Hopefully that helps.
Yep, and I can chime in just a little bit on the end. Some things we've talked about with sites is that they would prefer that, if sponsors or CROs can provide, at least at the national level, a starter kit for the Medicare coverage analysis, right? That would help them go faster during their study startup process, or even, guidance on CPT codes, for example, that that they might be wanting a particular procedure. So certainly it's a good conversation that as sites and sponsors and CROs, as you're going through that process, definitely encourage conversation at that level to see if there are things that are actually accelerating and able to go faster. I'm going to actually go back, just one comment here. I'm going to go back to this. I think somebody said the survey, the submit button can't be seen.
Here, I'll go ahead and scroll down and see.
Just in case somebody, if this didn't work, I'm going to try to go back to it. I'll just leave this slide up for a little bit here to see if that helps.
Yeah, that works. And we will be sharing the results of this survey in that write-up in the post kind of Q&A review for us. So we will be able to kind of share with you what your peers have shared in terms of challenges. There was another question. This one's a little bit long-winded, but I'm going to give it my best shot here. So a security review and approval of all study-related IT systems prior to IRB submission are required by our site. In order to determine the level of review required, we provide a table requesting, tech software information, tech software contact info, supplied devices, etc. And this process, they report, is very cumbersome and time-consuming. So is there a way that CROs and sponsors can provide a little bit more upfront information related to these platforms? With us, as Advara being a vendor, I think we're equally as curious to hear what you would have to say about that as well.
I'm happy to
here. I was trying to read
this one,
there.
At least the first pass.
Yeah, go ahead, Ian.
So I think part of the challenge is that not all sites. It sounds like this one site that raised the question has a very sophisticated IT group. Most, I would probably hazard a guess that most sites don't have this requirement, or maybe it's not even half that have this type of requirement, is my guess. But that's not to say it's not important, right? Because you're looking at patient privacy, you're looking at data privacy, you're looking at all of the regulatory requirements. I think that's probably leading to part of this problem, is that it maybe is not on all sponsors' radars in terms of a common requirement, but is definitely something that should be able to be addressed by the sponsors in advance while submitting the entire IRB package. So that's an interesting point. I'm actually going to take an action myself to talk to a few of my sponsors to see what they're doing in this space.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Ian. And yeah, from a CRO standpoint, I think we need to do the same thing really around probably that feasibility phase, right? So if we understand what technology is being used, and then we just need to understand also from the site is if they're using the same technology over and over again, do they have to resubmit to the IRB? Those types of things are going to be critical for us to know up front too.
Yeah, two quick comments on that. One is I had a question for whoever asked that question. Is it are they submitting it to the IRB, or they're submitting the security review to IT? It just so happens to have to be before IRB. Either way, yeah, that is an interesting one that we don't hear from many sites. I actually almost hear the flip of it, which is sites are using their own technology, and during the study startup process, sponsors are asking them for lots of questions on their own technology. So kind of on the flip, it's kind of thinking about what can sites have ready to talk about their technology, so we can have a consistent, vendor assessments or whatever it might be, to make not either one of those to be a roadblock during the process. Since it's a lot of repeat technology. So I know we're at time, and so Anna, wrap up comments.
Yeah, I will just have a few admin notes here. So when the broadcast ends, the survey will appear, and that after you complete the survey, that's how you'll receive your certificate of attendance via email. So if you have any trouble obtaining that certificate or have any follow-up questions to what we discussed today, just email us at webinar@advara.com. Again, thank you to our presenters and everyone who participated in the webinar asking really thoughtful questions. We appreciate it. Don't forget to connect with us on Twitter and LinkedIn, where we may be discussing some of the follow-up questions here on our social channels moving forward. So we're going to wrap up today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much.